so official. Great. Well, I appreciate folks joining for Saturday and chance to get out of the heat. We're going to be talking about Expo 875 held in Okinawa, Japan, which is probably one of the hardest ever expos to get to because of where Okinawa is. For those not familiar with it, Okinawa is a archipelago off the coast of Japan, but it's not right off the coast of Japan. It's a pretty good sized distance away. So basically, to get there, you had to fly to Japan, and from Japan, you had to fly to Okinawa. And for those not really familiar with Okinawa, just a little bit of a background. Before World War II, Japan decided that it was going to take over a chain of islands, much to the displeasure of the people living there. But when you have one of the biggest armies and navies in the world and the other guys have absolutely none, you get your way. So Okinawa found itself as part of Japan. It was the last major battle for World War II on the way to occupy Japan and that part of the war. Basically, the Japanese knew if the Allies got a foothold in Okinawa, their goose was cooked and there was nothing going to stop them from coming to Tokyo. So a major battle took place, both land and sea battle. The Americans landed on it. They quickly conquered the northern part of the island, which turns out is where Expo 75 was, but the southern part held on. So all the stories you read about Japanese hiding in caves years after the war, that sort of thing, a lot of that came out of Okinawa. The total death toll for this was breathtaking: 49,000 Americans, 110,000 Japanese soldiers killed, and an estimate of 40 to 150,000 Okinawan natives. They really have no idea how many because there had been no census of the area beforehand, and so the estimates really vary. But you get, 200,000 something people killed in this one battle. When they were able to take over the island, they finally had their last stepping stone to build the fleet and the armada to go into Japan if invasion had been necessary, but the atom bombs ended that. So the American military held possession of Okinawa until 1972, at which point it was turned back over to the Japanese, which did not go over well with a lot of the people on Okinawa. They thought this was a chance to have it finally become a independent country like it had been before the Japanese annexed. But the Japanese were determined to keep possession of Okinawa, and they saw Expo 75 as a way to show just how powerful the new civilian Japanese government was and what we could do economically for you if we poured hundreds of $millions into your island. A lot of the people on the island said they would prefer a more, typical Pacific Island way of life with fishing and that sort of thing. They didn't really need the West, but Japan persisted and Expo 75 was launched. Turned out a number of the Okinawans decided to sabotage the efforts. They would do little things like sinking supply ships or burning down things under construction. But eventually, Expo 75 did come to be, and I'm going to jump into some photos in a moment. It was basically a smaller exhibition. It wasn't on the size of a 64 World's Fair or anything like that, but it was an officially sanctioned expo of the Bureau of International Expositions. So let me get ready to do some photo sharing here. 1 second. Share a screen. Okay. So the title of it was Okinawa, basically the sea we would like to see, Expo 75. The formal title being the International Ocean Exposition of Okinawa, Japan, 1975. Flyer here, brochure that they gave out, if you see down at the bottom, was originally supposed to go March 2nd through August 31st. It was later changed to July 20th through January of 76. And this shows the reason why was that this was the time of the energy crises, all the oil embargoes and everything else. And it caused delays in getting the thing built. And there was a question whether or not they'd ever be able to open because if people couldn't get there by airplane because airlines were having fuel shortages, how are they going to get there? And there was basically no other way other than to get there by air. You can see there's a structure in the center of it going out into the ocean. This was called Aquapolis. It was the theme structure. A little bit of a fanciful depiction here. It did not have a dome on it in the center. We'll see some more pictures of it. We'll take a look inside our little brochure. It gives you an idea of what was there to see. Again, this ran on the part of the island going north and south. We later see another map where it's flipped over in a different direction. But everything was based on the sea. Fish in the sea, boating in the sea, transportation. So you had a whole bunch of different exhibits here, and they built what they call clusters. So you had a group of pavilions where was a cluster of ships. And that would be analogous to the transportation area of the 64 World's Fair or the so-and-so zone of another fair. So they went with the title of clusters. So you had different clusters of shipping and fishing and that sort of thing. Basically, it was a fairly long and narrow World's Fair. The ocean all off to the left-hand side here and mountains off to the right. So this was really squeezed in there. Here again, where Okinawa is, it's off the southern coast of Japan. It's the set of islands that stretches all the way down from Japan down towards Taiwan or Taipei. You can see that the expo site was up on the northern side. Unfortunately, all the housing on the island was not up in the northern side. So it's approximately an 85-kilometer trip to get from the hotels into the expo site. And they provided shuttle service between there, but as you can imagine, everybody went at the same time in the morning to be there for the opening, and they all came home at the end of the day when it was over. So transportation to and from the ferry grounds became a bit of an issue. Because of the difficulty in getting there, the lack of hotels to stay in, and just the trouble of getting around once you got to Okinawa, it did not get a tremendous amount of press. And they ended up with a total of 3,485,000 visitors, which was about a third, I think, of what they were hoping to get. And that's really a very small number for a World's Fair at 3 million. It seems like Disneyland does that on the average weekend. There were 35 participants in it, not all the nations. There were some Japanese companies. I can't think of any Western companies that participated in it. And most of the international exhibits were rather small, and they were done, again, in these clusters of using shared pavilions rather than big, massive ones. And here they give you kind of idea where it is. It's Japan's southernmost prefecture and, way out there in the middle of nowhere. So they built the fair, and they also decided that this was a great reason, as I mentioned, to show the dominance of the Japanese government by building major roads, expanding the airport, doing all sorts of things. So when you finished Expo 75 and you try to figure out if it was successful or not, the Japanese government claims it made a very small profit, but that's because they took so many of the costs of Expo 75 and buried them into Okinawa infrastructure improvements that in reality, did Expo 75 make money? No. Some websites would tell you its major legacy was a city full of half-finished and unbuilt and ruined hotels because people realized nobody was coming to stay there. But here's a map. Again, this is now turned sideways, so the north is off to the left. But it kind of shows you how this whole thing was structured along. You had down at the very bottom Aquapolis, and it's interesting. It shows arrows from a yellow square to a white square. And that's because although, as we'll see pictures of it, looked like an oil rig, it was actually a floating city. And they're depicting here that because the tides or weather, it may be a little further out from shore than it is in from shore. So you have, again, if you look through the various areas, off to the left was Expo Land, a amusement park full of kind of traditional rides and that sort of thing. You had two major transportation systems that were being showcased as autonomous ride vehicles, things for the future. You had the Expo Transit system off to the left-hand side. That ran for, just trying to look here, it ran pretty much down between the fish cluster and Expo Land, getting people back and forth, and we'll see some pictures of it. The other one, the Expo New City Car, or the KRT system over there, was 3.7 kilometers in length, and it ran pretty much along the length of the fairgrounds. And again, they had transportation into the city. So we'll be visiting each of these areas. You can see the fish area, the people and history area, science and technology, and ships. Those were the major areas of it. So what I'm going to do here now is change folders. And we're going to be taking a look here at a number of publicity photos of Expo 75. So a poster advertising it, why you'd like to come out. And I guess if you had a boat and you wanted to sail from Japan, you could make it. But this is the part of the area where people could come in by ferry from some of the other islands in the chain. Again, it was quite a ride from Japan. It was about a 2.5-hour plane ride, I believe. So most people did not come over by boat. So this is their port that they built for people to bring in and come in if they were coming in by ship. They were also trying to entice cruise ships to drop by, and their tenders could bring people in by tender, and that did become a popular stop for a number of cruise ships. So now we get to opening day. This was called the floating stage. Everything again was done around water, so I have a big stage out there floating around. And we have some captions up here of letting you know. So they finally opened on July 19th, 1975, and they're talking about, if you read all through this, the various areas. The U.S. Pavilion was one of the largest international exhibits, and not surprisingly, this picture comes to us courtesy of the U.S. government, which wanted to make sure everybody knew about it. Again, some more pictures of opening day. I don't think anybody was very smiling, because that's just a very stoic sort of country, but I think they were very glad to get this thing finally opened with all the political battles, like I mentioned, sabotage of trying to get it open, and then the oil embargo threatening to cancel it totally, just like Dubai had to cancel theirs. They're not cancel, postpone theirs a year because of COVID. These people had to postpone theirs because of the energy stuff. So this is Expo Beach and Expo Land. If you look down below, again, you can see a Ferris wheel, a roller coaster, a variety of things that were down there for people to visit. Just like at the mentioned the Chicago World's Fair, they built a beach in case people wanted to go out to the beach. And it's hard to imagine I would go to a World's Fair, so I would go to the beach. So most of the pictures you'll see look like this, with some umbrellas and that sort of out, but not a lot of people going to the beach, because if you're going to go to the World's Fair, you tend to go to the World's Fair. But very beautiful beach, and it was enlarged and built out just for Expo. Another picture showing more of the Expo Land. You can see the rail system that they had built out there. That's the so-called Expo Future Car CBS system. And here it is again, sort of like the Walkway People Mover, if you're familiar with it from Walt Disney World. This was an electric powered system. The cars did have the luxury of having onboard air conditioning built into them, and you could get a ride through it. And this was built not so much to get people around the site, but as a demonstration of a prototype system that Japan was hoping would be linking different city centers around the country and hopefully around the world. I am not aware of any other CBS systems ever being built out after this, but they were kind of neat looking little futuristic cars that ran on a track. You can see they're on rubber wheels, and they ran on a guide rail system. So it's not a monorail, that they were actually cars on wheels. And here is the competing system. This was called the New City Car, another company, again, the KRT system. They both wanted to prove that their systems would work in a urban environment. And again, in this particular one, no central rail or guidance. It went down with getting power from the track, just like a third rail of a New York City subway. That would, again, allow them to do the things like put an air conditioning system on board and keep these things going. Little headlights because the system ran at night, but they're fully autonomous with no drivers in charge of them. So we're going to take a look here. This is the people and history area looking down below. You can see, again, some of the area, the train system off there, about where my mouse is moving around to get people in and out of the major, into the city. And this is Aquapolis. This is the theme structure for the event. As I mentioned, the original thing showed a dome up on top. They decided not to go with the dome, both for cross-cutting measures, but this also gave them a very nice heliport to bring VIPs in. They didn't have to ride the train out from the city with everybody else. Again, it looks like a oil rig. It's not. It was a huge structure, 100,000 square feet of space on board. It was built in Hiroshima at a cost of $41 million in their money then. So $41 million, and it was built on the mainland, towed here. And this one structure became a real source of discontent between the people in Okinawa because they said, you just brought this here, why didn't you build it here? And it was a massive thing to build. The shipyard that built it actually had to build a new dock that was big enough to build this thing in, that they could flood it and take it over there. The structure, as I said, floated. It does look like it's on pylons, but those are basically supporting structures anchored by giant cables and anchors to the ocean. There's a video you can find on YouTube of this thing riding at a typhoon in I think it's in the mid 80s, late 80s, something like that. And it was going up and down real good. So it did not get anchored to the ocean floor. But it gives you an idea here how the whole structure, again, up here, this is the beach area we've previously seen. Over here, the major highway that they built that would run up and down the length of Okinawa, again, built just for to tie in the Expo. And then Okinawa, Aquapolis standing out into the water. This area was the cluster on ships. Again, most of the things being inside and air conditioned, which is a good idea because Okinawa gets rather warm in the summer. But in the area where my mouse is moving now, they had a number of ships. Here's a little submarine, all that out on display for people to come and look at ships. Then you had an area built on fish. Up here we see an aquarium. We're going to be taking quite a look inside. Massive aquarium, and if you want to go to Okinawa today, this is still there, and it's one of the largest aquariums in the world. We go on more looking at the fish, a little closer look over at the aquarium area. And finally, one last look at the cluster of fish. So we get into the individual pavilions in just a moment. This is the Sumitomo Pavilion. Multimedia display. It would look very familiar if you've seen this in Expo 86 and others with multi-screen displays. Here's the Iran Pavilion. As I mentioned, most of the countries went with their pavilions inside a shared pavilion. There were a few that went outside to try to show how they were doing. If you can remember Iran, all the controversy going on with ousting the Shah and all the rest of it happening roughly in this period of time, they were trying to show that they were a force to be reckoned with. You don't think of Iran, of course, as being a major, ocean-bearing or ocean, centric nation, but they were making the point that they were as interested in the seas as anyone else. Entrance to the aquarium here. Very, very popular. You can see the line waiting for it. People trying to get in. They brought in not just fish from the native waters, but they had cold water tanks and that sort of thing, bringing in fish from around the world. And it was very well received. So we're going to take a look inside. Lots of displays of different fish wandering through. Big part here was about how important the oceans were to the world, not just as a way to get ships from point to point, but as a source of food with aquaculture, and also a lot of displays about how important it was to preserve the oceans and stop pollution in that, because if you did manage to ruin the oceans, you are going to ruin life for people on land as well. So lots of environmental themed messages and presentations during this period of time. Mural up on the wall of fish, and we're going to continue going down. There's another part of the mural. You had touch screen kiosks that you could come and get explanations. They were also done in multiple languages, which was good because, again, although the majority of visitors did tend to be from Japan, they did get a number of Westerners coming in from the cruise ships and that. So I think these offered, I think I remember reading 6 different languages that you can get your presentations done in. Outside, you had more about the sea. You had a typical SeaWorld park. Shamu from SeaWorld would have felt right at home here. You had dolphin shows, you had sea lion shows, all sorts of things going on. So here you can see the dolphin, going backwards, looking very much like he's just part of the 64 World's Fair or an episode of Flipper. Jumping through hoops of lays, flowers to get his sardine, or two of them going in opposite directions. And Japanese industry was there, so you had all sorts of things about how they were doing things. And a lot of these companies had things that directly did with oceans. Mitsubishi made boats and boat motors and things like that. So coming in and seeing what their displays were going to be important. And it's kind of interesting to see the difference between daytime and nighttime for it. You had Expo Hall, was a general purpose hall, stage out front, and you could get space inside and show off things if you were not a large enough organization to get your own pavilion. Construction shot, they still haven't quite finished paving the area out front. And here you can see some rock musicians or a group up there performing, and everybody out entertaining themselves. Lots of performances and speeches and dances and all sorts of things given there at Expo Hall. Over here, another major Japanese company, Hitachi. Again, they had all sorts of things they would like to sell you, and you could go and find how they related to the ocean, or you could see the displays of the latest Hitachi television sets and electric rice cookers and other odds and ends. And some of the hostesses from the pavilion. They all very neatly dressed with their absolutely identical matching outfits, including pocketbooks. Okinawa had its own pavilion. This pavilion is still there today. We'll show some pictures of the site afterwards, but this was trying to explain what life had been like on the islands before the Japanese took it over. So a lot about their fishing industry, their indigenous history, and some thinly veiled hints that we would like to have our island back. This is International Pavilion number 1, very cleverly labeled. And again, this is where a lot of the nations participated with their displays inside, sometimes very clearly delineated, and others they would just kind of merge seamlessly from one into another. So now you can come in here and we can get a look at hookahs and other things in the United Arab Emirates. We can go and look down and see what Egypt has to do, and they're talking, of course, the Nile and how important water is there. So it wasn't just oceans; it was also rivers and that sort of thing. And talk about the Dead Sea and the Red Sea and some of these other areas. The Oceanic Culture Museum, talking about all the various nations of the Pacific. So you had things from Micronesia, Hawaii, various islands out there, recreation of a ceremonial hut here, and then demonstrations of the various ships that were used in ancient times to travel between the islands. Some tiki gods, things along that line. Some of these ships were real, that they were taken out of the museums and loaned here for Expo 75. Others were modern recreations that were built. Some of them were sailed before they got there. Others, I don't know if they ever set, out on the ocean, but they again demonstrated how people had traveled in times past. Again, a whole bunch of things about native cultures, different dance ceremonies, coming of age routines, things that were done. And they had a area here you could sit on. This just wasn't a set of steps. If you turn back to the other direction, be looking at a stage where, again, presentations and performances were done for folks. So here's the USA Pavilion, again, the largest international pavilion, $1.8 million or so they spent on it. And again, remember, Japan spent $41 million alone on Aquapolis. You can see the train system up above, shuttling around the grounds. And we're going to take a look at the USA Pavilion where we're cutting the ribbon and we're going to go inside. And we get a list of who all the people are here. And they're expecting that 2 million visitors during a 6-month run. Well, this was really interesting because they had initially been hoping for about 12 million people. How they came up with 2 million, don't know, but it ended up getting 3.4. they had, during the time of the crises where they were trying to figure out if they were going to open at all, they totally slashed the estimates. And they took a page out of many other rule books. If you think you're going to get 5 million people, say you're going to get 2, and that way when you get 4, you're a runaway success. And that's how I used to do all my budgeting and scheduling when I was in the IT world. I would tell people this would take a year and $1 million. And then I was really hoping to get it done in 6 months. And but then when it came in at 9 months, I was still a hero because I was 3 months early. So it worked out well. So more of the U.S. Pavilion. And Japanese American flags flying in solidarity. And this was really no mean political feat at this point in time. You think about it, World War II had ended less than 30 years earlier. There was still a lot of animosity on either sides. A lot of veterans, for both countries that weren't particularly fans of the other guys. And Okinawa, by the way, was where they introduced things like kamikaze aircraft. It was a really nasty battle. So the USA and Japan went way out of their ways to show that bygones were bygones, and we would be able to participate peacefully together. So more about the flags going up here, more about the pavilion. They had 42 exhibits, 167 displays, all about American involvement with the sea. It's interesting, in Osaka in 1970, they brought a moon rock over, and it was the biggest draw at Expo 70. There had been talk about, do you bring a moon rock over to Expo 75 as well? But the decision was made, no, let's focus really on ocean and stick with the theme here for it. So let's all these little displays at this model ships, things like USS Ironsides, others in there that you can look at. And inside, they had all sorts of submersibles and how things are going to be done. This was a manned submersible. You can see the dummies sitting here in the center of it. The whole idea was that mankind was going to be able to get these great things and go explore the ocean, look for valuable ores like manganese nodules and other things that were important. But also it might open up the area of ecotourism by taking people down in their little blast closed submarines and be able to explore themselves with the ocean. Up above here in the upper left corner, a more traditional heavy-duty one for immense depths with a very small viewing sphere you can see up here in the center, as opposed to a giant glass dome. So something like the big one on the right would get you down to maybe a couple hundred feet. The one up on the left is in the thousands of feet. This one was really great. American scuba diver. There's more about him on the caption, which follows. He was just like Shades of Living Seas at Epcot. He would go off into the tank and he would write on the slate and wave to people. So here's a little talk about him. He's from Chandler, Arizona. So Wayne might know the Kleinfeld family. But where else would you get a scuba diver but from Chandler, Arizona? Kind of an interesting thought on how he ended up becoming a diver. So they would go off into the tank. They would come and wave hi to people, and then they would also show the latest in American scuba gear, including amazingly a TV camera built into a diving helmet that was broadcast live out to monitors around the tank. Not to be outdone, the USSR said, well, if the USA is going to be there, we're going to build a big ass pavilion. And I always get a kick out of all of the USSR pavilions at various expos. It seems that they must have this in storage someplace and take it out and plop it down, because you go to almost every World's Fair with the USSR pavilion, and there's Mr. Lenin just so happy to see you coming in, and they don't go out of their way to make them look like your friendly neighborhood uncle that you'd like to be. It's like, come to my pavilion, like it, or you're going to a gulag. It's just strange to see that same one at every one of these. But USSR was all about their undersea exploration and their little robots and undersea vehicles. We'll take a look at Aquapolis. Again, major structure out there. You can actually see the tram ran all the way out there. So it's right where my mouse is. This walkway was not particularly long to get out there. But again, it was hot and sunny. So if you get more people to come out, you can come out on your tram. The whole idea of Aquapolis was to show that you could have floating cities, that Japan was getting very crowded. land was becoming very expensive, so why not take the advantage of the fact that we're surrounded by water and we could build these floating cities out there. So the whole idea was, could tides power generators that were floating in the water underneath the city? Could you extract seawater and turn it into fresh water? If you put solar panels up on the roof, could you generate electricity? Up here, the structure here, wind turbines driven by the wind. So it was a very ambitious thing to show that the sea could support people on floating cities. The only one ever built, because again, at $41 million, it turned out to be very expensive. But it turned out to be successful in meeting its design criteria in terms of energy efficiency. I don't believe it was totally energy sufficient because the technology at the time didn't allow it. But most of the power for Aquapolis was generated on board with a smaller amount supplied coming in from the shore. So we're going to go off to Aquapolis and take a look at it. And inside, again, this was billed as 100,000 square foot, the largest floating individual room on the surface of any ocean. So, there's certainly had big rooms on things like aircraft carriers, and that I've never tried to prove their claim of how big a carrier deck is on an aircraft carrier, but they were very proud of this giant room out there. At night, it looked kind of nice, all lit up and everything, very calm sea. The site was obviously selected for calmness so that you didn't make everybody seasick visiting it. And as I mentioned earlier, this section here could move in and out depending on what the tides are doing. And again, if for storms and that, they could snuggle it in closer to shore to try to protect it. Or they could make it further out from shore to protect it so that waves that were crashing the shore were less dangerous to it. Nightly fireworks show over Aquapolis every night. The WOS group, a group of Japanese companies, went for a very interesting pavilion designed as a giant whale. So we can see its fluke raised up in the air and people entered in the base of the whale. You can see more of the whale-shaped structure during the day, nighttime shot. Up here, some sunlights that let more light in during the day, but it was popular for people that wanted to be eaten by a whale. Italy, again, they obviously have a lot of coastline, a lot of interest, and this their thing was mostly about pollution and safe exploration of land. What's really interesting, if you look at the signs here, again, it's the Italy Pavilion, but the signs all are in English. So a lot of the international exhibits actually went with English or Japanese signs. And I think they realized that not a lot of people were going to come from Italy over here to Okinawa. So let's go and make signs for the biggest audiences we have, which were the Japanese and American groups. Mitsui had a children's, pavilion. You could go and get real wet inside, which was a real popular thing with a lot of kids. Overhead, a giant moss, or not really moss, a floating garden in the air with like ferns and mosses and things like that to show, again, that you don't necessarily need soil to grow things. You need sunlight, you need water, and you can make things grow in amazingly different sort of areas. And all sorts of stuff that kids could come in and you could pump things up. And if you pumped water down here with a little pump, something up here would spin and do something. If you did something over here, something over here would spin. So it's very interactive water-based sculpture for children to entertain with. More about water. This particular display talked about water density. So water, if you have different levels of salt in it, things will sink to the bottom of this, but up here, the same amount of water, but a different amount of salt. So talking about things like how the Dead Sea and other areas can be totally different water characteristics. There's still water, but very different from the ocean or the water that comes out of your faucet. Over towards Expo Port, again, you had boats. It was very popular that you could come and take one of these boats down here. There's another famous island that I can't remember, and I would mispronounce the name anyway, off of the coast here, and they could take you out for a ride over to the island and get back. It doesn't really show down here. They built a major bridge going across this area where over here had been very isolated and basically inaccessible. As part of Expo, they built a major bridge going out over there. And again, this is a ship's area, so we had all sorts of modern boats. So you can see that we have, the sort of boat you'd see up on Lake Arrowhead here in California, little sailboats and other particular ones. And they also had traditional boats. So they brought in here, you can see in the back, a four-masted schooner. You had Polynesian type war canoes, all sorts of things going on. And people sitting here at the stage watching the races going by. And it looks like these guys have a pretty healthy lead, so I think they're going to win. This was an interesting one, an amphibious car, very different than the amphicars from the 64 World's Fair. I looked at it with this, the markings up on the fin here, try to figure out, was that to show how deep the guy had sunk if it didn't work? But they came out, they would drive along, they built this special concrete ramp into the water just for the amphibicar, and he would ride down into it, and when he got down into it, he had these wings that came out from the side to give it some stability. And from what I gather, it moved along at a pretty healthy clip, but I don't think we've ever seen one of these going down our roads. And again, the floating stage, all sorts of water-based shows, water skiing shows, things like that were done. Chinese junk brought in for this particular one, musicians performing out in front of it. Going over to, again, some of the Japanese companies that were exhibiting there. I don't recall what the central display of this particular pavilion was. Oh, I guess we get to see polar bears. So again, deep sea suits. This is Britain. Britain had been doing an awful lot of work with these heavy armored suits that would allow people to work on the oil wells for the North Sea oil exploration, which were done at tremendous depths, that they would be able to go down and fix things that were done. And again, oil was a very big thing on people's mind with the energy crises. So Britain was touting their expertise of being able to put people down unprecedented depths, and not just having to work with robots, but have men be able to go down in these things and be able to work. International Pavilion number 3, again, another shared area. A bunch of VIPs coming in from the city. And you had trams that ran around the city, or the site rather. It was a pretty long site, very long and narrow, so they made sure that they had transportation going up and down, particularly so they didn't want people falling over with heat exhaust problems. Lots of things. This was a stage built out on Aquapolis, and they would have different groups come in here. Here's a Western jazz group performing. Hula dancers performing the same things. And again, they would be invited to come in from the different Polynesian islands or from Hawaii, that sort of thing. And they actually went way out of the way to have a Miss International Beauty pageant out there. So bringing in people from all across the Pacific Islands. I don't recall there any participants from anywhere other than the Pacific, even though it's billed as Miss International. I believe they were all pretty much Asian participants. Our proud winner, very happy that she's won. This one I don't have the name for, sorry. There's a couple of them that I could remember what they were, research what they were, and others, they're just the Dome Pavilion, that sort of thing. Sculptures done based on ancient ones. Again, these were all modern recreations done for Expo 75, but based on ones that were found on Polynesian islands. Inside one of the pavilions. This was, again, one of my areas, again, trying to research this and remember what on earth these things were. Good luck. People out on the gardens. Some of these gardens are still there. We'll be seeing pictures of them in later years. Kite flying over the scene. This is kind of interesting. It's at Expo Land. They built this miniature railway, and it's just like if you went to Griffith Park out here in LA today. Same sort of thing. Walt Disney had his miniature train. Looks very popular, and having a great time chugging around on their little garden railroad. They also had displays of working boats that you can come and see. So they would be able to show you how they could do fishing from boats, firefighting boats, all sorts of various odds and ends. We're giving performances off in the water. We stopped by the Philippines, obviously a nation with a huge vested interest in the ocean. They also had a big interest in trying to convince people from Japan to come to the Philippines for tourist purposes. So a lot of the Philippines displays are based on tourism possibilities as well as business opportunities to come over, and we can help with our cheaper labor than you have in Japan. We can build items for you, either from our own native materials, or if you bring stuff over here, we can put it together for you and ship the finished goods back. They were very proud of their seaside bazaar, all done like stalls you would see in many a Japanese shopping street, and you could go and get the usual sort of trinkets that were done. Interesting, there's not a lot of Japanese Expo 75 merchandise. I've never, for example, seen a model of Aquapolis for sale. It was mostly come out here and buy leis or shell beads, buy sunglasses, beach towels, that sort of thing for the rest of your stay out here on Okinawa. Back to the Oceanic Culture Museum. Again, some of the displays and banners and that sort of thing, you'd see through it. And we're getting to the end of Expo. The Prince Akihito and his wife are out here. Rainy day that as Expo 75 is being closed down for all time. Coming by the aquarium, walking out to the official ceremonies, getting one last look at the fish. And the never-ending set of speeches and everything that have to be given as Expo 75 is putting its lights out for the last time. So these are all from the closing ceremony. Looks like the same 4 guys that sat there at the opening, and I don't think they're smiling again. And that closes that. So Expo 75 closed, and now you, oh, I guess real quick. Yuko has raised her hand. So let me stop sharing for a second. And yeah, Yuko, if I'm saying something, or if you would like to add, you can unmute yourself.
Actually, it's not Yuko, it's Dennis. I just wanted to comment on the unsmiling faces, the somber faces. So Yuko and I attended a wedding about the same time as those photos. And there was a wedding photo and the whole family was there and everyone was somber except for 2 people. That is to say, the 2 Americans. My wife, who was not familiar with Japanese customs, and because she left Japan at age 18, and we were the only ones who looked happy. Everyone else looked like they were at a very serious funeral. Additionally, there was a question about whether, I noticed a question whether there was color film in Japan, and the answer is yes. Fujifilm as well as Kodak existed, but certainly Fujifilm would have been in Okinawa.
Yeah, glad you mentioned. I was just reading through the chats and people were asking why they were all black and white, and it's because these were all publicity photos. Trying to get amateur photos of people that went to Expo 75 was really a task because, again, so few people went. Most of the people that went were from Japan. It's very hard for me to source some color pictures from Japan because even if somebody's listing on eBay Japan and I can't read it, it's very hard to get to. Well, let me show you some color pictures. 1 second here. I just need to share the screen again. 1 second. Okay, zoom, share screen. So yes, color pictures did exist. This set of postcards from installed on site. And again, we have Aquapolis out there, an aerial view of it. And yes, it's all in color. So we'll be seeing a lot more of it in color in just a moment. There's the aquarium pavilion up there, the beach and Expo Land, the Kayo Midori Ken Pavilion, the Mitsubishi inside the Oceanic Culture Pavilion, Just a general outside view of the trees and palm trees and flowering trees. This was the cover to the postcard set. The Sumitomo Pavilion. Again, self-explanatory which one this is and which one this is. And we got one more view of the whale. So what I'm going to do now is take a look into what happened to Expo 75 afterwards. Basically, it shut down, the World's Fair ended, and you had this tremendous amount of infrastructure. And Okinawa was fairly smart. Rather than destroy it all and just turn it into an empty lot, they decided to make it into a theme park, very much like Expo 67 continued as Manda's World for a number of years. Okinawa unveiled the Ocean Expo Park, and it became a very popular park. Not all the pavilions lasted. There were a number of them repurposed and done over time. And what we're going to do now is take a look 10 years later after Expo 75. A fellow named Peter Warner had gone over to Expo 85 in Tsukuba, Japan, as I had. But Peter made a kind of interesting detour that he went off to visit Okinawa 10 years later to see what it was like. And I was able to acquire his pictures. So we're going to take a look now. What it mentioned, it stayed open. So Aquapolis, this is 10 years later, was still open. Aquapolis actually stayed open until 1993, so it had quite a long run. 1993, it finally started succumbing to age and that, because as we all know out here, if you're reading the newspaper, everybody's telling us how the Queen Mary is rotting and it's going to fall on its side out in the port of Long Beach. You leave anything in the ocean for 20 years and it starts needing some work. So in 1993, they closed Aquapolis. It stayed on site until the year 2000, where an American company bought it and towed it off to be scrapped, and it's all gone now. But we're now in 1975, standing on the deck of Aquapolis, looking back at the mainland of Ocean Expo Park. And again, these were all parts of the things that were, the exhibits were still there. You could still come out. The tram ride that went around, you had to walk out there. They no longer had the tram ride running out there, but you could come out and get this, view the various exhibits, which were being well maintained from all the accounts that I have of the time. So again, this is the entrance walkway. You can see that it was meant to slide in and out on rails, going in and out. No more train taking you out. You could walk out there. And a nice view of what the area looked like. Again, it's hard to believe that 40 years earlier, before the shot, this was the most intense battleground of the Pacific War. And we're going to leave Aquapolis in a moment and go off into the, what's left of the fair. And in some cases, absolutely deserted, run-down, empty buildings. They had not torn some of these down. They had basically gutted them, taken all the displays out, but they were trying to figure out what to do with it. If you remember in another picture over here, this was a fountain. I think it was the Midori Pavilion, all sorts of water pouring out of this fountain. The main building all gone, all sorts of debris and everything left. But for some particular reason, they left this fountain structure, obviously a fountain no more, but just sitting out there in the field by itself. All sorts of debris and junkyards of things out back. And as Peter said, you could just wander anywhere you went because there were no fences to keep you from going anywhere. You had some street lights that were still left out. There used to be walkways, pavilions, and all that. Now there's just street lights out in the middle of nowhere. Walkways and covered entranceways to things that are nowhere. And they had not torn these down for two reasons. One, it cost money to tear it down, but they were still hoping to find companies to come out here and use it as sort of an incubator, a think tank, that, hey, we have this very modern, air-conditioned, building with power, lighting, and everything, and all you need to do is come and put an inside in it. Why wouldn't you like to come out here and move your business out to Okinawa? Unfortunately, again, Okinawa is not an easy place to get to, and it's not a real place to run your business. So, a lot of them were just sitting here waiting for tenants that never came. And again, this used to be one of the main walkways. They've torn out some of the pavement and that sort of thing. You can see all the gravel, but again, the former site. Sort of a very eerie, desolate sort of environment. Sunlight's into a building that's down below. I think in some of these we actually go into the buildings and they're just, you can see empty shells. Greenhouses out back, no plants growing in them anymore. There's the bridge I mentioned. This bridge was built just for Expo 75 and connecting over to the other peninsula out here. Down below, some of the other buildings that have been repurposed into a industrial park. Down here was the port, which you can see was not exactly being full of cruise ships or anything at this point in time. I'll jump to some more pictures. They're in another folder, so bear with me 1 second. So this is all October 1985. We're up now at the top of the hill looking down off to Aquapolis. Down below, you have, this is where the Garden Railway ran back in years past. They had a track out here that they could have competitions on. And again, I mentioned before, there's another island that they had boats that during Expo 75, you could go out and take tours out to some of these islands, which are very much off the beaten path. But again, a lot of these buildings were still in existence and still being used. So we're going to be taking a look at some of those closer up. Remember the road that we saw the VIPs on their motorcade before? This was within the Expo grounds going through it, and also a highway connecting the rest of the area. Here's the main highway out here. The trains are all gone, of course. But they built some very nice gardens out here. This whole section has been very well maintained. This is all part of Expo Park. This particular area down here was gardens with all sorts of plants of Micronesia that were brought in, not all native to the area. Interesting, in this particular area, they put, I don't know, but sod or something growing up on the top of the buildings, showing how they could help keep cooling costs down by putting green up there as opposed to concrete. Again, Expo Harbor out here. The area you couldn't get to before in the new Expo 75 bridge. Evidently, the people out here both loved it and hated it. They loved it because it was easier for them to get to the mainland of Okinawa, but they hated it because it was easier for everybody to come out and go visit them. So, and again, just more views around the site. This was International Pavilion number 3, if I believe. Oh, number 1, I'm sorry, number 1, the fountains. Mentioned before, the Okinawa Pavilion still there, still having things about native culture from Okinawa. Okay, on mouse, stop flipping back and forth. And the aquarium was still there, so it's the Sumitomo Pavilion. Now, some areas they repurposed. They had taken the pavilions out, but they still had, staircases, put flowers and that sort of thing in there. You can see they did not get a lot of crowds some days out there. Sculptures that I mentioned have been brought there, recreated on the site, are still out there. International Pavilion 1. Sculptures, some giant birds. Some of these were added new after Expo as the area was redeveloped for a park. And one of the things they did here, you can see how big these birds are, and down below there were picnic tables, so you could come out to the park and enjoy yourself and getting out of the Okinawa sun. The former Sumitomo Pavilion and the beach, which again is still not having a particularly busy day. And the aquarium, very, very popular. Oh, this island out here is what I mentioned. They love framing the major walkways of Expo, all pointed out to this island, which is important in Japanese culture. And they wanted to make sure that things, I guess when you get into the issue of Zen and all the rest of it, that it was oriented to look at this particular mountain. Aquarium, very popular. Over time, it wore down. They closed it in 2003, did a major refurbishment of it, added some huge tanks to it, and is now built as one of the largest aquariums of the world. And it's very well received by people in that particular industry. The shuttle had been replaced, more modern one, and a more scaled down one because you didn't need large things because not a lot of people. But again, it's a very large park, and you can take the shuttle from one end of it to the other. The Sumitomo Pavilion. And we'll have one more set of slides to hop in here. And again, some of these I don't know exactly which pavilions were which, but Peter had a great all day wandering through the buildings and you know, looking through. As I mentioned, you could walk inside. All the exhibits were gone. The power was off in them, but they had a lot of sunlight, so you could just walk through the pavilions and take pictures to your heart's content. What's really nice to see when you think about it is that this place has not been heavily vandalized. If this had been in the United States and you had a World's Fair that you closed the doors, walked away from, and everybody could get out there, we're not seeing any spray paint. The glass is still all intact in all the domes and greenhouses and that sort of thing. So we're not seeing a lot of vandalism and that sort of thing, which made the site last for quite a period of time. So again, very desolate and quiet. Peter said there was not another soul out there at this point in time. Light fixtures up on the roof, a few years since they had seen any use. More remnants out back. Down below, parts of displays. These had been inside the pavilion. They had all sorts of pictures and everything attached. They had been just taken out and put up in piles out here. So in case you ever came back and wanted to use them, there they were, but all the exhibits themselves were gone. Over here, somebody playing around with solar panel, doing something with it. Why is hell out there by themselves? Maybe they were trying to power these street lights for one more time. Again, that fountain that I mentioned earlier, and just roads going off into nowhere. What if you gave a World's Fair and nobody came? It sort of looks like it, doesn't it? Aquapolis sitting out there. I think we're going to end our view, if I remember right, with a couple shots of Aquapolis. No, okay. This was something they repurposed of the pavilion. This was called the Tropical Dream Center. Again, inside tranquil gardens outside. And the idea was to come inside and tout the value of life on the Pacific Island, how quiet it was, how peaceful it was, and why you might not, again, like to bring your company or folks out here. But you can see what a nice job they did with the gardens out here. They really, little fountain going off in the center and plants all around it. So the park is still open today. Matter of fact, right now it is not open because of COVID. It was closed because of COVID. They were hoping to get it open, but as you may be aware, Japan is going through an absolute problem right now that may imperil the Olympic Games. They had announced a reopening date for the park, but now they've put it off and say they hope to reopen again when COVID is over. But they have maintained the grounds and a skeleton crew out there maintaining all the plants. Happily, skeleton crew out there maintaining the aquarium and the fish are all reported to be in good health. And they're hoping that when they get past COVID, that they can reopen Expo Ocean Park. They have a website. Some of it's in English, some of it's in Japanese. But if you find yourself off a beaten path, or you find yourself on a cruise ship that happens to be making a stop in Okinawa, as a number of them do, you can go and revisit Expo 75. So that's it. And as I said, it was. Did anybody here by the chance? I always should have asked at the beginning. Anybody go to Expo 75? Yeah. Anybody have heard of Expo 75? It was really off the beaten path. It was. Wonder what sort of internet connections they have today. Knowing Japan, it's probably damn good. I bet it's probably better than some of us have in our houses. But it was kind of interesting, World's Fair, again, proving that if you have enough money, you can build a World's Fair anywhere. And if you're running it because you're the government, you can declare a profit. So they spent all sorts of money getting this thing built. Again, you can go out and visit it today, and as soon as COVID allows you to, assuming that you can get out there, because again, it's not the easiest place to get to. There's still no direct flights from the United States to Okinawa. There used to be back when the military ran them, but today it's just not the sort of place that attracts enough business. So you're gonna have to go through Japan. But there's another World's Fair coming up in Japan, in Osaka, which I think is 2025. And that might be a good reason, just like Peter Warner did when he took his pictures, that if I found myself in Japan for Osaka Expo 2025, it can't be that far to go to Okinawa and be interested to compare it to the 1985 shots. So any thoughts anybody has, or comments, suggestions, or observations? You feel free to raise your hand or unmute yourself.
Yes.
Hey, Baron.
How is everyone? I'm sorry I missed last week. I had errands to run.
We gave you 2 demerits.
Okay, that's okay. You know what I kind of find unnerving about this, as with other things, and you kind of pointed this out. It was more of an emphasis when you showed Knoxville last year. Is man's destruction of architecture, or his decaying architecture. It's learned when you're young and you have erector sets and Lincoln logs and building blocks, that you build something and it's nice and beautiful, but then instead of just constantly admiring it, you tear it down and build something new. And that process continues on of tearing down the old, building the new, tearing down the old, building the new. And that's progress man has developed for himself to continue. When you see something like this, particularly something of prominence, and again, this is where I bring up Knoxville, because it was roughly evident the same way, of how man has created wonderful architecture for him to enjoy. And although some of it had been repurposed, the decay of it over a period of time, due to neglect, due to a lack of funding, due to disinterest, due to whatever the nature of man, has caused the decay to this wonderful architecture that he has created for himself, makes it unsettling, makes it, when you look at it. And there was a lot of that in the plight of our large cities, with the big projects that they had built for people that over a period of time went to neglect and became decayed and eventually came down. But when you see something like this, and again, particularly, I guess the biggest example was, New York World's Fair, although most of that came down and there's, some of it's still there, but particularly here, there was a lot of architecture with the weeds growing up, and it wasn't rattled with graffiti, thank God, at least in the pictures that you showed. But it's just rather unnerving, I think, what man sometimes does to his architecture through neglect, for whatever reason that neglect had occurred. And I was just a editorial on my part about this, as my study of architecture has always continued. I just thought I'd bring that up.
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned Knoxville. Some of the fairs like Knoxville built in an old rail yard. So their whole thing was get rid of this horrible rail yard and let's put up some temporary structures and tear them down. Things like Expo 86, again, all temporary structures to get rid of a bed, rail yard, and some other odds and ends. So in this particular case, they built some, sorry, the dog, for some reason, the dog reacts to certain tones of the speaker. As soon as Baron started speaking, the dog was, I don't know what that is, but it says the bass tones or whatever. So she's out in the hallway just trying to defend her from the universe. Yeah, so a lot of these fairs are built totally with the idea of build it, clean out crap, put something in there, and pay for the urban renewal, with a fair. Others are done with the thought of, leaving something behind, although most World's Fairs tend to be temporary because you want to encourage people to build really crazy, weird, structures. You would think about it, it's not a lot of call if they say, hey, I want you to build a structure that will last for the next 50 years and it has to be in the shape of a whale, people aren't going to do that unless maybe it's a Disney theme park or something. But, for the most part, they raise the site. You get the end of, Knoxville, you get the end of Vancouver and everything, you tear it all down. The big
Well,
exceptions again being Expo 67, they left so much of it. And here they left it because they were hoping to repurpose those buildings as an industrial park. But Okinawa is definitely not an industrial island.
well, that gets back to where, you have your erector set as a kid and you build something fabulous and you show it off and then you tear it down, let's build something new, so that cycle continues. So you're not dwelling on, what was there and how sad it looks. And, the fact is, well, why don't they do anything about it? I know we've all made comments, within the last year when you have shown, and everybody's shown pictures of New York World's Fair, particularly IBM and AT&T, how wonderful that architecture is, and the fact is it only lasted for 2 years, and if you never saw it, you'll never see it again, except for in pictures. But the depth and the complexity of thinking that went in to create these wonderful pieces, is just very, very short-lived. And
So that's sort of what makes them special, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, to
Yes,
me,
indeed.
you
Indeed.
you got to go and you got to see it because if you don't see it now, you won't see it, then. And then again, as I mentioned, it encourages people to think out of the box. Build a building that you don't care if it falls down in 3 years. So you can build all these things that you imagine the Bell Pavilion trying to maintain that over the years. The cost would be astronomical. If you just got to keep it alive for 2 years, so much the better. But that's it's interesting you mention that sort of thing because the art critics, and I always hate art critics. I guess I'm being a critic of art critics, so maybe they'll hate me. But the 64 World's Fair, so many of the architectural critics hated it, because the building was just so weird. To me, that's what made it so great. I mean,
They were idiots. That's all.
yeah,
They were
absolutely. I'm glad you said it, and I would agree. I mean, building shaped like a giant egg or typewriter ball. Wow, that's really cool. But they just didn't want it. That was back when they were starting to build all the giant glass and chrome skyscrapers all around the world. And I think building things like the Bell System Pavilion or the Ford Pavilion and everything. Wow, they really jumped out at me as being great stuff. So Brent's mentioned the Parthenon in Nashville, a holdover from 19th century exposition. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. My son went to school in Nashville. He went to Vanderbilt, and we went out to take a tour in the grounds there, the Parthenon. It's really kind of interesting to see. I also liked it because it was a giant, big steam engine right behind it, and being a train nut, I could go off and take a look at that. So yeah, there's a few things that are holdovers from other exhibitions. Don was just down in San Diego, and they have a number of pavilions that have been repurposed and some cases rebuilt from others that got destroyed. Did you get to see any, Don?
We didn't spend a lot of time at Balboa Park this time, but yeah, there are a lot of them. A lot of them are actually reproductions of previous World's Fairs, such as the Ford Pavilion and such. So I'd say about half the pavilions from their World's Fair still stand. It's actually pretty impressive. So.
Yeah, particularly when you think, like even the Ford Pavilion from the 33 Chicago World's Fair was built as a temporary pavilion for 1 year because Ford was only there for the second year of the fair. And hey, it worked out so well. Let's take it apart. Let's move it back to Michigan, put it together, and lasted for years until somebody was putting a new roof on it and managed to burn it down to the ground. So you wonder how many of the things would have survived. It's actually interesting. I think the biggest killer of old World's Fair pavilions is roofing crews. I mean, it sounds like a joke, but go and pay attention. So many pavilions have been burned down by roofing crews. They get out there with their hot tar and soldering irons, like on the Ford Pavilion they burned down and had metal seams that they were heating up to, redo the roof, and they burned the building down. Expo 67, the US Pavilion, we have to go and do some work and fix the metal framework. Oh, we burned the plastic skin off and left the pavilion in ruin for years. Balboa Park had some huge ass fires. Again, people fixing roofs. So to me, it ought to be illegal to have people re-roof World's Fair pavilions because they just tend to burn down like crazy.
Yep, the one big legacy of the World's Fair there, actually, Balboa Park, came about. They had a wildlife exhibit there. And after the fair shut down, a guy was wandering the closed fairgrounds and he heard a roar. And they just left the lions and all the animals behind, and they were in their cages, they were starving. And he heard this roar and he said, we have to do something to save it. And so he donated some land. That became San Diego Zoo.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah, so it's literally right on the back of Balboa Park.
Yeah.
But yeah, that fair was responsible for the creation of the zoo. So their motto is, it all started with a roar.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Dave English, you had your hand up, sir?
I had a couple of questions. One was, when you paid the ticket to get into this fair, was it a one price and you got to see everything?
Yes.
Or were there individual prices?
No, it was one price fair at all. There was a ticket booth at the entrance to Aquapolis, and that was more for crowd control. Basically, they did what would be viewed today as a fast pass type system. They didn't want everybody going out there because if you saw, it was a very narrow walkway. And one of the things that they had to be concerned about was, God forbid you ever had to evacuate it and you can't get everybody off of it in a period of time. So they controlled how many people went out there to go out on it. If there was not a particular busy crowd, they would just let you out. They had turnstiles to count how many people were out, how many came back. And if it got busy, then they would start giving you a please come back at 3 o'clock sort of thing. And then you would get priority. There was another line to go in at 3 o'clock to get out there. So they may have been prices. I think the only area they charged for rides was Expo Land. Again, you had to pay it was pretty typical for those things. Pay an extra fee to go on the Ferris wheel or the roller coaster. Those are all built by concessionaires, hoping to sell enough tickets to make it worthwhile to go off and build it. But everything else, all the shows like at the floating stage and that sort of thing, they were all part of the admission.
And the other question I had was,
real quick on price. The price to get to Expo 75, anybody want to guess what the price of a ticket was in American dollars?
$2.
$6.70. So it wasn't a bad deal at all. One day, all the shows, $6.70.
Wow.
Dave?
Was there a breakwater built? It looked from one of the photos like the beach was sheltered from the open ocean by some kind of a seawall or breakwater that was out quite a ways.
Yeah, that was at first a natural outcropping that went out there that they supplemented and built up a bit. But that's how they chose this particular area. Again, it was an archipelago, which I think came from parts of an extinct volcano. So there was a natural outcropping that went across and made that a very sheltered lagoon. And the Expo Beach, the area they built up, that was pretty much a flat beach that they put the projection out into the ocean and dumped soil out there. But they put some additional rocks in out to bolster up the protection of the natural breakwater that was out there in the first place. So all part of the Japanese government's effort to show that Okinawans what a benevolent government they were getting.
Well, my time reference is when you have these programs, I kind of think, oh, what was I doing in 1975? And in 1975, I was in Florida for 4 months building or working on the Space Mountain at Walt Disney World, which preceded the one that was done for Disneyland. So that was, it's pretty amazing of what they were doing there in this far-flung area of the world. And at that same time, we were doing somewhat seemed to be amazing things at the time. One of the thoughts for Space Mountain was there was going to be this huge TV screen because Space Mountain was sponsored by RCA, and they wanted to have, as people walked through the pavilion, as they exited the pavilion, there was a speed ramp, and they had RCA broadcast cameras behind the, basically looking through behind the scenes, taking a long and a medium and a close-up shot of the guests. And they wanted to have that displayed on a huge, in those days, a 25-foot television screen was pretty amazing, in the Florida sun, which required a very, very, very bright image. And the only thing available, this of course was way before LED displays and all that, was a machine called an Idafor. And the Idafor would have done it. It was very expensive to buy. Worse than that, it cost something like $30,000 a month to run it. So that was the end of that idea. But it was a great idea, you know, let RCA put you in the picture and let people walk up to the pavilion and see happy people leaving the thing. Anyway, 1975 was an interesting era in technology, and seeing the expo. These programs are always like eye-opening to me, Bill. I really appreciate the job you do, and it's not trivial, I'm sure, to put it together.
So it's funny you mentioned 75. I was trying to think back to what I was doing. That's when I was on submarines, you know, and 76. I ended up making this transition from submarines over to Disney. But it's funny, the things you mentioned, the RCA pavilion, they had the speed ramp coming out. They did put cameras in, but not with a giant screen. But people can see themselves on TV. And I remember sitting in the VIP lounge. It was actually the manager's office, the RCA pavilion, and talking to him. What great fun this is and everything. And he says, "Oh, wait, here goes one of my favorite things. I know they're going to do it." And the speed ramp's going out, and there's a bunch of teenage girls all giggling, and a bunch of them lift up their tops because they want to see themselves topless on TV. And he had a button on his desk that would override the PA system in there, and he would push a button and go, "Your mother must be so proud." These girls would just about die. And it turned out that it was actually a video loop that they could delay the broadcast going back down to see yourself, 10 seconds, 30 seconds later or whatever. And they had to make sure that the staff was not saving all the footage of all these girls exposing themselves. But he goes, I said, "Does this happen a lot?" He goes, "Oh yeah, just wait. Oh, girls, that's very cute." Yeah, he just had the time of his life sitting there pushing that button.
People are funny. People
the
are.
look in their face, and they'd all start screaming as they ran out of the pavilion. It was definitely an e-ticket attraction. So and then Yuko mentioned, unfortunately, a lot of the civilian deaths on the island. The Japanese had been putting out the word that the Americans were going to do horrible things to both the civilians and the soldiers. They were going to rape every woman on board. They were going to skin the Japanese soldiers alive, boil them in giant fats, that sort of thing. So quite a few of the deaths on Japan from the Japanese side were suicide, including the primary Japanese commanders that were in charge of the defense of the southern part of the island. Once the Americans got there, they committed basically hara-kiri and did themselves in. So that's why the population of the whole island was absolutely decimated, and again, why there's still resentment today from the some people that live out there towards the mainland Japanese. That it's just like there's always people here that would like to split off Northern California versus Southern California. We always talk about splitting into. There's a lot of people that still like to see Okinawa as a independent nation. Economically, it'd be pretty tough for them to do, but from a cultural point of view, you can certainly understand their impetus in wanting to do so. Anyone else? Anybody else have a trip to Okinawa in the future? Again, Expo 2025 is supposed to be in Osaka. Hopefully they're able to get past coronavirus by then. We will be looking at Expo 70 in a couple weeks, but we have another interesting talk coming up next week. It's going to be about the Griffith Park Observatory. How many people here have been to the Griffith Park Observatory in California? Oh, a whole bunch. Well, Carolyn, would you like to just chat for a moment and set the expectations for next week?
Sure. So a bunch of years ago, I got involved with Griffith as their exhibit writer, and they, as most of you know, they renovated and reopened in 2006. So I thought what I would do is talk a little bit about the observatory's history, where it came from, and it's been around for almost 90 years, so it's not falling in. And some connections to Hollywood, some connections to Disney, and then connections mostly to astronomy and to the larger world, and what we've actually done when we did renovate the building and put in all new exhibits, because it's a lot bigger than it used to be if you haven't been there since 2006.
It did quite a bit of excavation under, didn't they?
Yeah, they did. They had to do a lot of blasting, and they ran into some problems, which upped the cost a little bit. It was a $93 million renovation in excavation.
When does it open again?
As far as I've been told, the 25th. But that depends on what your governor says on the 15th. So, yeah, so maybe we'll all know more next week when I give the talk about when they're going to open. But if you're a member of the Friends of the Observatory, which is now called the Griffith Observatory Foundation, they're having little preview visits as soon as it's okay to open. So if you are a member, you've probably gotten an email about it already.
Well, things are starting to open. Today is the reopening of the Los Angeles Police Museum. I was asked if I wanted to come out there, and I'm still not going near crowds just yet. So I will go there another day, and we will tour the museum vicariously through Carolyn next week. But you know, out here on on the 14th, the disease is deadly, and we're all going to die. And the 15th, we're all cured, and everything's safe. I'm going to wait a little bit longer and see how it all goes. So.
Yeah, I think you're going to see people masking quite a bit. The deputy director, who may actually come to the talk, it was my boss when I worked on the exhibits. He said that the staff will probably be masking up just yet because they're basically at the mercy of all the crowds coming in. So I don't know many more details than that, but I just thought what I would do is show a little bit of how they renovated, what the excavation was like, and then talk about how we did the exhibits from almost 2,000 miles away because we were working in New York on the exhibits.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing it. It's been a while since we were out there. I remember going out and watching the pendulum swing around. And I remember going out there for laserium shows and that sort of thing. So,
everybody remembers those. Yeah, I need to remember to put a picture into that because they did not bring laserium back after the reopening, and there was a giant sigh of upsetness across the entire Southern California basin because it wasn't coming back.
No, it was a real popular show. So.
Oh yeah, I grew up watching those. Yeah.
Well, thank you all. I hope if we're not here next week, it's because we've melted. Week 108. I'm very happy I get to do all the scheduling for my LAPD unit, and somehow I did not schedule myself for the day of 108. I did schedule the people I don't like. They're going in. So
it's 73 here.
It's crazy. And then of course
it's cooler out on the beach.
Yeah, well now we're getting really into fire danger season, so it's going to be a very interesting summer. So
yeah, we've actually already had several fires in the last week in Colorado.
It's crazy. So again, I have Expo 70 coming up. Probably might be 2 weeks from now. I have a couple other odds and ends. Again, if anybody lives near a particular theme park or a railroad center or thing like that you'd like to do, please feel free to let me know. We'll schedule you in, and maybe we'll just have a week where Joey does nothing but dance around in the gorilla suit. So
I'd love it. I'd love it.
Great. Joey the singing gorilla.
Anytime.
Great. Well, thanks all. Appreciate everybody joining.
Thank you, Bill. It's good to see everybody.
Great to
Stay
see you.
safe.
All right. Bye.
Thanks, Bill. Bye.